It lasts forever, but it was only 15 minutes. But it felt like hours, and it was frightening.
Because of that ego thing, because you realize you're small all of a sudden.
Yeah, once I realized that I'm nothing, I realized all my fancy clothes, my big car.
Can you explain to me why it makes you emotional just talking about it? Because I imagine the reason it makes you emotional is because for 4 decades you've been trying to find happy, man.
Well, you know, when you think you know everything and then you realize you don't know anything, that's a big awakening. You can call it growth or you can call it divine intervention.
You do realize you're talking about the toad like someone would talk about God, right?
Well, I don't know. I'm not going to say it's God. I'm not going to put nothing in the same breath as God.
Can you explain how it changed you?
It was just the death of your ego. Now when your ego died, I felt so naked and afraid at that particular time because that's all I really had when you really think about it was my ego.
Addicted to alcohol, cigarettes, food, even sex. What about painkillers? Researchers and some addicts are now turning their eyes to an illegal substance for help.
Researchers in Britain have found that psychedelic drugs can create a higher level of consciousness.
Why some psychiatrists and researchers are giving psychedelic drugs a second look.
This stuff is all too interesting just to go on keeping it swept under the rug. And meanwhile, the Inquisition was a long time ago. The birth of rationalism was a long time ago. At this point, there's no good reason, apart from bad habit, to keep up these barriers.
With the help of two concepts that are traditionally opposed, science and spirituality, we humbly reintroduce psychedelics back into the cultural dialogue.
As bizarre as it may sound, now, could this be a blindness miracle?
If anything, it just reminded me of my own fragility of my own consciousness and my own perceptions, and that there's another world right over there that is existing in a parallel way with my own world. So
it does seem to be that way, and you know, we could try and shy away from saying it, but it seems evident that it's something along those lines.
Yeah.
It blows my mind sometimes thinking about this because the old me would have never been able to rationalize that. It was just like, okay, let's just forget that happened. That was weird, or you were mentally ill or something. You know, that's what you're trained to think. You know, if you're having these experiences, your brain isn't working, or it's doing something weird, or, you know, for a neuroscientist's point of view, you know, well, that's just this neuron overfiring and releasing too much glutamate, and, you know, it's all a chemical response. But the fact that my body took a chemical and decided to give me a feeling of comfort and spirituality and sort of went that way with it was nice.
I've also been a fervent proponent of the psychedelic dimethyltryptamine, or DMT.
I can tell you about my positive experiences that I've had with a lot of different things in life. Natural psychedelic experiences like the use of an isolation tank. And me personally, I've gotten great benefit out of certain psychedelics because I think they dissolve ego, and I think they offer you a view of the world that may not be possible without it. A lot of plants. There's many plants that contain DMT in it, including the human mind. The human mind produces it. The body produces it. It's produced in your liver. It's produced in your lungs. And they've even shown recently in tests with live rats that they are actually producing the pineal gland itself is actually producing dimethyltryptamine. And that is what they've always thought of as the third eye. The pineal gland is this thing that sits right in the middle of your head and literally is your third eye. And certain reptiles, it actually has a retina and a lens.
The project, led by David Luke at the University of Greenwich, will focus on dimethyltryptamine, the most psychedelic drug in the world. Luke hopes that this project will help shed light on whether or not the powerful substances can offer a cure.
And it's thought that in certain states of consciousness, people can have experiences of mental imagery, perhaps even if they are congenitally blind.
Now, it's difficult to imagine a society more different from the society of ancient Egypt than our society today. We hate visionary states in this society. In our society, if we want to insult somebody, we call them a dreamer. In ancient societies, that was praise. And we have erected huge apparatuses of armed bureaucracies who will invade our privacy, who will break down our doors, who will arrest us, who will send us to prison, sometimes for years. for possessing even small quantities of psilocybin or substances like DMT, whether in its smokable form or in the ayahuasca brew. And yet, ironically, DMT is, we now know, a natural brain hormone. We all have it in our bodies, and it's just that its function remains unknown for lack of research.
Researchers across the nation are tuning in and turning on to psychedelics a few generations after psychologist Timothy Leary unintentionally stigmatized them. In the 1960s, Leary conducted a series of valid experiments with LSD and psilocybin. But as he devolved into an infamous psychedelic poster boy, the drugs escaped the lab.
The natural state of the brain is chaos.
In 1970, the federal government made the drugs illegal, in the same category as heroin. The mainstream medical community tapped out, even though there was a lot of data suggesting the drugs might help people with certain mental illnesses.
I was fascinated that how could this have been such a big part of psychiatry and that I never heard about it, completely buried in my training. And that just made me really curious to look further into it.
Why do you think that our body produces it?
We don't know. I mean, we need to research it. We need to find out. There's a lot of theories about it, which range from completely fantastical to, the idea that it's just a part of normal human neurotransmitters and normal human neurochemistry, and that when you take a large dose of it, you just get this scrambled, crazy signal that you can misinterpret for being a conversation with God. The people who believe it's an actual mystical experience believe that what it may very well be is a chemical gateway, and that there is another world beside the material world that we exist in, and that there is more than one way to experience this type of transcendent consciousness experience. Whether or not it's a hallucination or not, it is the exact same experience. So if you are actually going to another dimension and communicating with God, or whether you think you are because you're taking this psychedelic drug, the experience is indistinguishable to you.
And so there's just such a vast history that's kind of taboo to talk about, of course, because psychedelics are illegal. They're a very taboo source of dialogue in our society today. And you've also said that you don't follow any organized religion, Joe, but it seems like you're a very spiritual person.
It's not as though our society is opposed in principle to altered states of consciousness. I mean, billions are being made by the unholy alliance of psychiatrists and big pharma in overprescribing drugs to control so-called syndromes like depression or attention deficit disorder in teenagers. And we have a love affair in our society with alcohol. We glorify this most boring of drugs, despite the terrible consequences that it often has. And of course, we love our stimulants, our tea, our coffee, our energy drinks, our sugar, and huge industries are built around these substances, which are valued because of the way they alter consciousness. But what all these approved altered states of consciousness have in common is that none of them contradict or conflict with the basic state of consciousness valued by our society, which I would call the alert, problem-solving state of consciousness.
Why is it that in the entire Western world, these substances that have been found to be so interesting by hundreds of cultures for thousands of years are prohibited? How did these cultures that consider themselves to be enlightened, democratic, and scientific get to declaring plants illegal? It can seem weird, but there's clearly something deep and revealing about the nature of these societies.
Our society values alert, problem-solving consciousness, and it devalues all other states of consciousness. Any kind of consciousness that is not related to the production or consumption of material goods is stigmatized in our society today. Of course, we accept drunkenness. We allow people some brief respite from the material grind. A society that subscribes to that model is a society that is going to condemn states of consciousness that have nothing to do with the alert problem-solving mentality.
The fact that these studies are happening at all represents a mighty change in the scientific community, a renaissance in thinking about psychedelic drugs like MDMA, LSD, and psilocybin, the drug found in magic mushrooms.
Why has the war on drugs been such an abysmal failure?
Well, first of all, it's not really a war on drugs. It's a war on some drugs. And the drugs that are government sanctioned and they're taxing them, those are not illegal. Alcohol is available almost everywhere you look. It's one of the worst drugs we have. As far as the consequences of using it, it's one of the most screwed up drugs available to people, and it's everywhere. We just sort of understand that one shot of Jack Daniels has this effect, one beer has that effect, and it's because of the fact that it's pretty strictly regulated, and it's part of our culture and has been for a long time. We've just accepted the fact that this drug is at every restaurant you go to, is at every supermarket you go to, is in drugstores. It's everywhere. I mean, it's amazing. And there's nothing wrong with alcohol. Don't get me wrong. I'm 100% down with you being able to do whatever you want to do with your body. But we're incredibly inconsistent. The amount of prescription drugs that are prescribed in this country points to that. The amount of people in this country that are hooked on meth, the amount of people in this country that are hooked on pharmaceutical drugs. These are huge, huge numbers. And then there's drugs like marijuana, which literally hurt almost no one.
But I think everybody realizes that the promise of a society over monopolistically based upon this state of consciousness has proved hollow, and that this model is no longer working, that it's broken in every possible sense that a model can be broken, and that urgently we need to find something to replace it. The vast problems of global pollution that have resulted from the single-minded pursuit of profit, the horrors of nuclear proliferation, the specter of hunger, that millions every night go to bed starving, that we can't even solve this problem despite our alert problem-solving state of consciousness. And look what's happening in the Amazon, the lungs of our planet, this precious home of biodiversity. The old-growth rainforest being cut down and replaced with soybean farms so we can feed cattle, so that we can all eat hamburgers. Only a truly insane global state of consciousness could allow such an abomination to occur. We can spend countless billions on warfare, on hatred, on fear, on suspicion, on division, but we can't get together the collective effort to save the lungs of our planet. And this is perhaps why shamans from the Amazon are now mounting a kind of reverse missionary activity. When I've asked shamans about the sickness of the West, they say it's quite simple. You guys have severed your connection with spirit. Unless you reconnect with spirit and do so soon, you're going to bring the whole house of cards down around your heads and ours.
Dimethyltryptamine, also known as DMT, and the spirit molecule.
Yeah, that's often a nickname it's been associated with.
The spirit molecule,
That is
right?
indeed.
Okay.
With people who have had kind of first-hand experience between these various different psychedelics, that there is a huge overlap, and many people report just having the exact same experiences with either of these psychedelics.
And DMT is the active component in ayahuasca.
And it is an interesting thing when you consider this is a banned substance. I think it's kind of, in America it's Schedule 1, which the definition of is, one of the conditions of making it Schedule 1 is it has to have no therapeutic use whatsoever. And I think as we've seen through the testimonials of other people, and with a lot of scientific research that's coming out now, that's not the case. And
it seems the most ridiculous thing to me to say.
Backwards.
Something with researchers out of the UK, something they want to do to find out if psychedelic drugs can actually help people whose brains are unable to form mental images, as bizarre as it may sound. Now, could this be a blindness miracle?
When he took the drug, he told researchers, quote, "I never had any visual images come to me. I can't see or imagine what light or dark might look like. During my psychedelic experiences, whenever I listened to music, I felt as if I were immersed in the most beautiful waterfall ever."
It was like just an oddly emotional feeling. It was very abstract. And then like the last thing that I remember from that first trip was like, it was almost like the Last Supper setting. Like, and I'm not even a deeply religious person. I was raised Catholic, but literally it felt like I was sitting at the Last Supper, and it was just like, this was completely normal. And then right after that, then I woke up and I was just like, did I just go to heaven? This is this is bizarre. Like, I started off seeing shapes, and then there were cats, and then I felt like I fell out of space and ended up at the Last Supper in heaven or something. It was just such a weird, bizarre experience. And they're like, my friends were like, yeah, a lot of us have had similar experiences. It's like crossing over. And I'm going, crossing over where? They're like, oh, to the other side. And I'm going, none of this makes sense to me. It was very interesting to have a like spiritual experience at the end, because again, I don't consider myself spiritual, and I'm going, why would my brain take me there, you know, out of all the places? But I felt safe, I felt comfortable, I felt accepted.
I don't know, I did feel that for the longest time, but there's just something about a lot of my later experiences that it did feel like I was connecting with some sort, I hate to use the word spirit, but that's really kind of what it feels like.
There was a sense around it that there was something special, that it wasn't like anything else. There wasn't like other psychedelics. Its intensity and speed was such that it really produced a different kind of response. I mean, I remember almost getting the sense that it was kind of like a psychedelic bungee jump, that there was a kind of raw leap into this rapidly changing environment that was very different than the more gradual approaches of other psychedelics.
And I've also been interested in kind of tapping into these states more without the use of any kind of psychedelic, because I do think it is more a window into these states of awareness, but it's not an actual doorway. I think it puts you into a certain alignment that allows you to be in the state of mind. But if you're constantly relying on something else to get you into that, then you never really learn how to walk yourself.
Yeah, so you're saying it's a window, not a doorway.
One of the things, besides what it does, one of the things about DMT that always fascinated me was the fact that it's such a simple molecule. It's everywhere. So all organisms have tryptophan. And all organisms have the two key enzymes that lead to the synthesis of DMT. And these enzymes are very ancient enzymes. They're all over the place. They're, again, part of basic metabolism. So theoretically, anything could synthesize DMT.
DMT is astonishingly widely available in plants and animals all around the world, but so far nobody really knows why it's there or what its function is.
That's a $64 billion question, is why is DMT in our bodies? Why is it in plants, in all sorts of mammals? And what is the role it plays in humans?
The conventional wisdom 30, 40 years ago was that these things had no real function. They were just sort of physiological noise, but that's a very naive understanding. And what we now understand is that these secondary compounds are, in a sense, the language of plants.
Why is it that human beings' central nervous system are wired to receive this experience? Must be that, there's important information to be learned.
So I don't think it's universally present in nature by accident.
I ask that you suspend any opinions, either negative or positive, about these compounds. Whatever you believe their value to be, they continue to have profound effects wherever we find their use, whether it's contemporary Western culture or in the Amazon rainforest.
And so, I mean, what I tapped into with the DMT, and it's again this exact same realm that I keep tapping into time after time with experiences with the ayahuasca. And I felt myself, and I've had a lot of other people report to me as well when they go through this themselves, there's this huge sense of familiarity to this place that you tap into. Okay. It feels like you're tapping into the very core of yourself. And the type of aesthetic design of this place was a kind of multicolored cathedral of some sort, okay. Kind of castle-like. And I remember kind of being in the presence of some other being who was kind of leading me through this space. So it was kind of welcoming me back almost. And kind of what I felt with this space, what I feel like I've tapped into with this, and how I've gone through many experiences with the ayahuasca, is that you're tapping into a kind of part of a more soulful part of yourself, I've gone through experiences with the ayahuasca, and it feels like the experience of life on Earth is that people have this multi-dimensional existence, I call it. It's just ideas I'm playing with right now, but you get this huge sense that you are present beyond this veil that is kind of lifted temporarily with the psychedelic. And it's almost as if you're a soul having the experience of a physical body. I know many other people have had that same type of feeling with it. And
there's some soul there, there's something beyond the physical.
Yeah, there is this sensation that the consciousness you have is something more than just a body.
Okay.
And I could feel that. I could feel this very strong presence of this kind of very force of life, the very force of existence that was living through me.
And so you say you originally sought out the DMT to help deal with childhood trauma. I think we've really lost our ways to purge this trauma in Western society. We've lost a lot of the ancient traditions and ancient medicines that allowed people to do so. And instead we're being given medicines that are more of a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. They don't actually get to the core to treat that trauma.
And it made me want to go try it again at some other point.
Wow.
No, it was insane. And all this happened over like 6 minutes, but it felt like, to me, it felt like this was like maybe 2 or 3 hours. And it was just like, oh no, you were just in there for 6 minutes.
And I'd like you to explain this to me, the toad. I'd like you to explain the toad to me.
Do you understand the toad?
Is it like ayahuasca?
No, it takes you to another level. Ayahuasca is nothing compared to this.
Is it called DMT?
Yes. The toad, and it's in the Sonora Desert and has a venom in it. And you smoke it. Once I tried it, boom! Everything just went so fast. And when I fell out, the only thing I was conscious, but I was out. My brain was still functioning, my thoughts, I could still talk to myself, I could hear my mind. And I was saying, I fucked up. And I killed myself.
Because you killed the ego?
Yeah, I'm dying. It was just really mind-blowing.
Spiritual in nature, though, right?
Yeah,
Like you're just...
Yeah, really, my whole life totally changed. It sounds like a movie script, but it's really the real deal.
At that moment, you're talking about like you come to and you are altered. You are altered and it stayed.
I don't know. I wake up, I'm happy, I'm laughing, I'm smiling, I'm thinking, what the
Really?
happened? Yeah.
Really?
Had no idea.
So sex, cocaine, championship belt, those weren't happiness?
Nothing, no. It lasts forever, but it was only 15 minutes. But it felt like hours. And it was frightening.
Because of that ego thing, because you realize you're small all of a sudden.
Yeah, once I realized that I'm nothing, yeah.
And how it changed you?
It was just the death of your ego. Now when your ego died, I felt so naked and afraid at that particular time because that's all I really had when you really think about it was my ego.
That's interesting because your ego served you too, or in some of the ways that other people would measure success.
Oh, no doubt, 100%. It made me that guy that I really wasn't interested in as I got older, but that made me a very special and famous person.
What can you tell me about how that ego was formed?
Well, it all started with Castellano. I never knew what an ego was until he expressed to me what an ego was and how successful, the most successful people have the biggest egos.
I believe he will be the youngest heavyweight champion of all time.
And I just believed what he told me. You know what I mean? And everything he told me was right. Everything he told me gave me success and gave me all the power that I thought I ever wanted.
Did Cuss give you any of the tools to shut off the ego?
No. Why would he do that? The only thing that I had was my ego.
Is that the first time you felt sort of love and safety?
100%, yeah.
Tell me about that first time. Where were you? What was the setting like? Were you freaked out? Were you nervous?
I will just say, for legal purposes, this was not in the U.S. No, joking. I was with a group of friends, and in a very relaxed setting. We had some DMT, but then things started changing. So I started having. It was almost like it became sort of like a little bit of a video game. This is very bizarre. After that played out a while, there was like a distortion of the reality there. Like what I was seeing was no longer like a 3D world. It became like a 4D world, which it was like time and space was bending. And then I had the sensation of starting to fall, which was really interesting. It should have been terrifying at the moment because like it was like I was falling into a black hole. That's what it felt like. But falling, and finally I sort of fell, and then I felt like I was floating, and it was very white, like sparkly type world, and literally it sounds really cheesy, but it sounded sort of like heaven-like.
And I could already start to feel this tremendous separation.
I reached across, and it was suddenly I'm in the universe, in this huge void with these beings on the other side, and I put out my hands, and this incredible rainbow of pink light went between me and these entities. And I was trying to make it be like a white light, but it was this incredible pink light, this energy of love this capacity of love that we as human beings have, that I was trying to just send to them.
How did DMT help you deal with your childhood trauma?
I've even had trips where I felt like I was lifted up, and it's very odd to describe this, but it feels like there's these tall people that are standing up like almost over the earth and looking down on us, and like they're gods or whatever that they are, but they have like a big eye. And I've had one trip where literally I felt like I was looking through their eye at the world below, and like I was a caretaker. I cared about the beings below. Like all those beings were all like encircled around like the earth and like touching each other and like infusing their energy in the earth. And I just felt that power and that love and that compassion, and I just felt like I needed to bring that love and compassion of everyone back into the world with me.
And there were these winged beings. I don't remember exactly what they looked, but were like angels, something like angels, that were majestically kind of flying through the space. But there was something about the quality of how they were flying that was unique. I'd never seen anything like it. It was like, I don't know, the sense of another realm that was there. My sense was at some point there was this implicit sense, this is the divine realm. This is the divine realm. And it was not like a thought, but it was like this implicit kind of grokking recognition.
It was all very, very impersonal until I got to the space where I realized that I was in the area where souls await rebirth. And I was there, and I had been there so many times before. I recognized it, and this incredible transcendent peace came over me. I have never in my life ever felt such peace. Everything was stripped away. Every hope, every fear, every attachment to the material world was completely stripped out of me. I was free to just be the essence of a soul.
After the medicine wore off, there is that familiar sensation of kind of coming back into the body. And I do remember that. That was part of almost all of those experiences of kind of coalescing back into sensory awareness and a sense of having a body and of that becoming a little more substantial. And then say, oh yeah, here I am. And I live in a body and I'm okay.
What you saw, what you felt, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, jumping right into it.
Yeah.
So yeah, usually when I go straight into it, there's this instance that comes up, and it came again during this experience. And when I'm smoking this and about to break through, I always have this very odd sensation of some kind of outside observation of me. I don't know what it is. It's a form of a consciousness part of my own self that's kind of looking back at me. But it's a very strong sensation, and
that someone's watching you.
Yeah, I don't want to put it in quite those paranoid terms, but it definitely feels to be some kind of external energy that's kind of observing you through this, in a sense. And it's always a very familiar sensation I go through. And I also went through the signature process of having this noise that picks up in frequency and gets louder and louder as this begins to take effect. And the myth of that was this is the noise the pineal gland makes upon activation.
Right, the pineal gland, the third eye.
Which is the third eye, yeah. Right. This is of course just myth, but it's an interesting idea to think about.
The countdown was like
counting down preparing for your death, like waiting to surrender. And you'd feel the coldness, and the coldness just going through your veins, and it's really indescribable. It's hard to, it's like ice going through your veins. This burning sensation would happen on the back of my neck. I mean, this was reliable. This is like clockwork. This happened every time that you shot me up with DMT. And then there'd be a hum, and the hum would get louder and louder, and to the point where it broke apart everything that I was or knew. It just got louder and louder until you just had to surrender to the sound, and then you were there.
I would get a warm, full feeling, a golden feeling in my chest before it went to my head. And I'd feel this warm rod about 1.5 inches in diameter start growing up inside my central channel. It would come up and sort of slow, warm up my chest, go up through my head, and slow down and put tremendous pressure in my sinuses behind my eyes, and slow down, start to grow and distend the skin behind my forehead about 1 inch, behind my hairline. And when I was afraid it was going to pop my skin a few times because it was a very physical feeling. About 1.5 inches, 2 inches above my skull, when it popped through there, then the psychedelic trip would start. I thought I died. I saw the white clouds, the Renaissance white fluffy clouds with the gods and the angels and all that stuff is what I saw. I thought I was dying and going out, but I did take a quick look at Cindy and a quick look at Rick because I had my eyes open, and they were both there watching, looking very calm. And I go, oh, that's really good news. My body looks fine.
So I didn't know whether it was my birth I was re-experiencing, my death which was yet to come, because I know that time crumbles. The linearity of time is totally meaningless in these states. You are at the Godhead, the point where all time folds in on itself.
I think DMT is a forcible reminder that there's a lot more about reality, the universe, ourselves, the biosphere, whatever, that there's a lot more to it than we imagine.
It seems our reality is not the only reality. Occasionally the cracks reveal themselves and may even want to be discovered.
Let's go rather to the ancient Egyptians who put their best minds to work for 3,000 years on the problem of death and on the problem of how we should live our lives to prepare for what we will confront after death. And the ancient Egyptians expressed their ideas in transcendent art, which still touches us emotionally today, and they came to certain very specific conclusions that the soul does survive death and that we will be held accountable for every thought, every action, every deed that we have lived through in our lives. So we better take this precious opportunity to be born in a human body seriously and make the most of it. And in these inquiries into the mystery of death, the ancient Egyptians weren't just exercising their imaginations. They highly valued dream states, and it's now known that they used visionary plants like the hallucinogenic blue water lily. And it's interesting that the ancient Egyptian tree of life has recently been identified as the Acacia nilotica, which contains high quantities of DMT, dimethyltryptamine, the same active ingredient that we find in ayahuasca.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of substances and things like alcohol are a way to sort of get you away from yourself, but ayahuasca is a substance that makes you face things about yourself, and I think that's the main difference.
Right, it's like they said that certain drugs help you tune out, and then the ayahuasca makes you tune in maybe to a way that you're just not ready for. It
can be very overwhelming for people.
Yeah, as I said, it's like putting a mirror up to your soul, and you get to see how you've been treating the rest of the world, and usually it's not good news.
Yeah.
That's the way I kind of describe it.
Part of our work is to respect these medicines, and then to change the culture enough that people doing them can be respected and held, and not everybody needs to do them, not everybody should or wants to, but that it isn't pushed to the side. And so part of that does involve then research, because that's how in our reductionist society we validate things.